But in a situation where you find that a person look at the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
I have said that.
Now let's take a look at the dailies on Daybreak this morning. Quite a number of interesting stories to look at. Now we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning, and the lead story on the Daily Trust newspaper talks about dozens killed in Niger, Katsina, Kaduna attacks, and it has the riders, that says terrorists overrun Niger security base, kill 11 operatives. And then the next rider to that, bandits sack Zamfara village despite 7 million naira levy. So recall that there was this letter that was written some time ago to some communities
by the
bandits in the state, saying that if you don't pay us, we are going to attack you. And so despite that payment, we are saying that bandits are still being, communities are still being attacked, which is quite sad. The next one, attacks giving us sleepless nights, and that's according to Katsina Emir. He's telling Osimbajo. And then you have, there will be change soon. That's an assurance given by the Vice President. Now the pictorial shows you the images, coming from Shiro local government area in Niger State, where one of such attacks happened. Quite devastating. You can see a number of people there looking helpless and devastated, by that attack. Below that, you would see 2023 tricky storms before Atiku. You'd find details of that on page 17. And then at the very bottom, how gunmen cut off my wrist, 25-year-old mechanic. And the next one says, doctors to FG, pay our salary arrears and training fund. Zamfara trip, your claim mischievous, presidency replies PDP. Not forgetting the stories below the nameplate. Some of them saying, CBN reduces ATM interbank transfer charges. And then Ekiti governorship, anger over outcomes of APC PDP primaries. Now 281 Nigerians crypto account restricted over security concern. You'd find that on page 23. Now the story about the governorship in Ekiti State, a lot of drama happening there. If you look at the discussions that have been ongoing concerning primary elections in our political parties as to whether direct or indirect primaries or consensus. In this case, we have seen that it has always been marred by controversy, taking a cue from the most recent one in Ekiti State. So it's really beyond just the mode of selecting the candidates for the political parties, but it goes further, to the internal politics as to, the behavior of, politicians when it comes to political primaries. And in most cases, you find that on one hand, there's this interest, by the powers that be in the state, and the interest of the party, on the other hand. So it's always, marred by controversy, but we see how all of that turns out. That's that for the Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
Okay, let's take a look at some more stories on the Blueprint newspaper this morning. The Blueprint leads with a story about how gunmen raided, killed 25 in Zango Kataf, Niger, in fresh attacks. And some of the riders there state scores still missing, 40 houses razed. Bandits took advantage of troops withdrawal. That's according to Shiroro Youth. El-Rufai sad, condoles with victims' families. And then you'd also find other stories on the Blueprint newspaper. Right at the top, Nigerian tech market low on merger acquisition, Flutterwave co-founder. And you'd also see on page 24, CBN goes after loan defaulters in new operational guidelines. You'd also find on page 6, presidency to PDP. Attack on Buhari over aborted Zamfara visit, shameful. Assures President will return to accomplish his mission, says opposition hanging on to lies to life. And on page 23, Hanifa, we are committed to seeking justice, ex-NBA president. A lot of people are on the lookout for that, and we do hope that justice is served diligently. And on page 8, you see Igbobi College has shown how visionary leadership can impact generations. And there you find a pictorial of the Kano State Governor Abdullahi Ganduje presenting the staff of office to Emir of Gaya, Ibrahim Abdul Qadir, during the coronation of the new Emir in Kano on Saturday. And you'd also see other stories on the Blueprint newspaper this morning. 2022, I'll challenge outcome of Ekiti APC primary in court. This is according to Bamidele. You'd also find Nimasa pays 37.6 billion into Federation account, investigate 12 accidents in 2021. Sanction leaders on the Mining National Convention, Lukman tells APC. And you'll also see stakeholders at Deloitte Roundtable commend federal government on implementation of economic plans. No, Ayuba, the one about CBN going after loan defaulters in new operational guidelines. We've seen cases where these people take loans and some will tell you, you don't need to pay back. It's for the government.
Yeah,
So it's supposed to be free.
the experience has always been that each time people access loans from the central bank, it seemed more like a freebies. You know, more like a saying, okay, just take this and go. So people do not understand that it's not a grant. It's a loan, so it means that you are going to pay back. Especially if you look at some of the beneficiaries of, this Anchor Borrowers program. I've had personal interaction with some of them, and I got to understand that they do not think that there will be a payback time because they feel like this is the government's own way of maybe ameliorating our suffering. In some way.
My own part of the national cake, as they call it.
And all of that. So, but again, you cannot blame them because in some instances, how does the central bank, for instance, go after defaulters? If you have large numbers in different states, how do you follow through, with the whole process and ensure that the people that are owing this money pay back? It's a huge task. If you look at the mechanism that they require to make that happen, is really lacking. So it's part of the concerns that experts have raised. In the sense that when you see these loans, so instead of achieving the desired results in terms of stimulating the economy, it doesn't get to do that because sometimes people access loans and then they go buy a house, they go add another wife, they go buy cars.
Okay.
And I mean, so it's really unfortunate. I wish that people do as claimed.
But I'm really curious. Some of these loans, like the one I know the Bank of Industry does, you have to bring a business plan, you have to map out ways you wish you to actually spend the money, and they don't actually give you all of the money at a go. They give you just running cost, and the rest, if it's for equipment, they get the equipment for you. But I don't really understand how the central bank actually does its own.
Yeah, well, I think that for the central bank, most of them, they use associations, they use groups. So for instance, you have, Rice Farmers Association, or say maybe you have Nakotan, or you have some of these, associations. Now they go through this association. These associations have a register of all their members, in the various states. So the members can access those loans through the association. And in most cases, sometimes it doesn't come in cash per se. It comes, in kind, in terms of, farming inputs, for instance. So they buy fertilizers, they buy, insecticides, some of the chemicals, seedlings, for the farmers. So these are the things that the farmers can access. But the thing is, at the end of the day, when the farmers go to the farms and grow these things, they sell them, and then sometimes the central bank doesn't get, the return of what they have invested in these farms.
It's quite
so
tragic.
so that's the thing. And some of the excuses, people have mastered the act of coming up with excuses that you really sometimes cannot contest. For instance, if someone in the north or the northwestern part of the country tells you that, well, he is not able to grow the things that he wanted to because of insecurity.
How do you tackle that?
How do you contest that? Or maybe they will tell you that there is no yield because there's a shortfall in rainfall. These are natural, I would say disaster sort of, even though in terms of the insecurity, it's a human-made tragedy. But, they are things that is difficult to really challenge or contest, and all that. So in that instance, what do you do? So those are the loopholes that there are.
Well, I really think the CBN should devise other means, of actually recovering, these loans some way. I don't know.
True.
Anyway.
And sometimes you find that there's a connivance, really, between, the farmers and the association, and then the central bank. Sometimes monitoring becomes a real challenge. Monitoring, in some of the local communities is a big problem, because how do you sit in Abuja or a state capital? Let's not forget that some of these beneficiaries are coming from villages, very far away. So it's monitoring, of this disbursement becomes a real issue, So I think that a lot needs to be done. They need to double up in terms of saying that all that has been budgeted for specific things go for those very reasons. Is one of the reasons why we are not seeing results, despite all the funds that have been pumped, into some of these loans. So yes, let's look at, other stories now. Taking a look at the Nation newspaper, quite interesting stories there. The lead story talks about governors lead opposition to revoked electoral bill, and then you'd see the riders there. Says resignation before primaries, unworkable consensus clauses in contention. Lobby begins to stop presidential assent as Buhari gets bill today. I don't know why anyone will want to lobby to make sure. Let's get the presidential assent first. But I believe that as some are trying to lobby to make sure that there is assent for that, others are there lobbying to make sure that there is no assent for the presidential for the electoral bill, mainly, I believe, because they are beneficiaries of the status quo. All right, now other stories there. At the top there you see post-primary crisis rock APC, PDP in Ekiti. Decision on petitions today. Oni slams Ayu Fayose. The other story is there, how CBN is battling rise in food prices by Emefiele. You'd find that on page 7. And then GAC, we have not decided to replace Sanwo-Olu. Then you'd see other stories, tax returns. FRS begins probe of big companies. And then below that, below the big picture, 29 killed in Niger, Kaduna gunmen attacks. So these are some of the major stories on the Nation newspaper this morning.
Okay, let's take a look at some more stories on The Guardian. You'd see right on the front page, there are only 2.5 million motorists captured as insurers plan 7,500 for third party. And the riders, stakeholders agreed to review 18 years after policy was pegged at 5,000. Inflation jerks cost of vehicle repairs. This is according to industry operators. And you'd find other stories there. Ohaneze warns of danger if North succeeds Buhari in 2023. Here we go again, the issue of zoning coming up. You'd find other stories on page 4. Concerns as cyber criminals unleash SMS-based Android malware on Nigerians. SSANU gives federal government February deadline to settle minimum wage, IPPIS. You'd still find on page 4, movement demands information on 3 trillion fuel subsidy. And on page 2, you'd see in fresh attacks, bandits kill dozens in Kaduna, Niger. These are some of the major stories in The Guardian.
All right, well, these are some of the issues that we've always talked about. Now, for instance, if you take a look at the story on the Guardian newspaper, Ohanaeze warns of danger if North succeeds Buhari in 2023. I mean, these are some of the rhetorics that we've always talked about. What danger?
Exactly. And
You know, what danger are we talking about? I mean, the Constitution gives, you know, the right to every Nigerian to contest for elections in the country. So, I mean, this concept about whether zoning or whether rotation of power and all of that, I think that that's a conversation that needs to be had, but not on the front pages of newspapers like this. In
right,
terms of,
and you know, the way statements are being put out are they sound quite controversial and these kind of statements are some of the statements that actually prompt people, you know, to bring out this kind of anger in people. You know, a lot of people have talked about the way stakeholders talk, the way they talk about these things.
Yeah, I mean, for some, I mean, we know that if you go to the newspaper stand, for instance, the ordinary newspaper stand, there are a lot of people there who will see this, but will not read the content or the detail of that caption. They're not going to read the caption, but, you know, but all they know is that Ohanaeze is warning of danger, meaning that, I mean, heaven will be let loose if, you know, Northerner becomes the president in 2023. So, but what about the implication? I mean, the interpretation of this. You know, that's one thing that should be of concern to stakeholders in this matter. And so sometimes I really wonder the interest groups that we have, whether they are there, you know, to aid national cohesion or to bring about division in the system. I think that some of these rhetorics should be curtailed. We've always seen it manifest, you know, in the eve of elections, and I think that it's not in the best interest of Nigerians. All right, now let's take a look at the Punch newspaper this morning. They're also talking about politics. The lead story says presidency. APC in dilemma over zoning may throw race open. You'd find the writers there says APC considering best options for winning presidential poll, and that's according to source. Parties free to pick presidential candidates from any zone, says ACF. That's Arewa Consultative Forum. APC keeps INEC waiting on convention. Bauchi awaits a peace panel. So you'd also see the pictorial there showing you some of the recent happenings over in Lagos. And then the next one, you would find the stories at the top there says FG must justify fresh 3 trillion naira vote, others for fuel subsidy, and that's according to the Senate. 24 gunmen down as killings rise in Kaduna and Niger State. Refineries rehabilitation gulped 100 billion naira in 2021, says NNPC. Bank customers transferred 278 trillion naira via e-channels in 2021. That's NIBBS report. Now, at the bottom of the paper, you see Fayose Oni clash, alleged sellout, rigging in Ekiti PDP primary. 3 arrested on Oshun. 3 arrested as Oshun vows clampdown on Ilesha killers. And then the next one, Ogun Assembly alleges graft, summons local government chairman. So these are some of the major stories on the Punch newspaper this morning. Okay,
let's take a look at This Day newspaper this morning. This Day newspaper is leading with the story about 2022 Nigerian women in tech break new ground. This is quite interesting. The Nigeria Bureau of Statistics has released a statement saying Nigerian women have taken charge of the critical technology sector. And you find details of that story on this day, right on page 20 on this day newspaper. You'd also see other stories. 95 days after launch, eNaira wallets download near 700,000. Oh, that's quite interesting. You see on page 6 again, Nigeria loses 6.5 million barrels of oil to force major sabotage in December. You'd also see other stories. The electoral bill pegs presidential campaign expenses at 5 billion naira. And we'll find details of that on page 8 on this day, this morning.
All right. Well, these are some of the stories on our front pages this morning. Quite interesting stories. One that got my attention on the front page of the Punch newspaper is about the refineries rehabilitation that gulped 100 billion naira in 2021, according to NNPC. Now, we are having this discussion about removal of fuel subsidy, and a lot of people are saying, how about the refineries, that we have in the country? Nigeria has 4 refineries, and it's overwhelming and difficult to understand why, after such amount is being voted, for the rehabilitation of the refineries, production is not ongoing in those refineries. I mean, they have capacity to produce about 445,000 barrels of crude per day. But again, we are not seeing that happening. And so that is why a lot of people feel that, especially say for labor, for instance, feel that, you cannot remove this fuel subsidy if you do not do the right things in terms of fixing, what needs to be fixed, our refineries, for instance.
And yet we're not getting to hear why these things are not coming to play. We talk about, oversight function, and yet we've not seen anything, we've not heard any statement released on why we are not seeing these refineries fully functioning after spending so much money, in that regard. Yeah,
so it's why we are still dealing with the issue of trust, between government and the lead and all of that. Well, these are some of the, stories on the front pages of our newspapers today. Unfortunately, our reviewer has been stuck in traffic. And so we'll take a quick breather now, and then when we come back, we'll continue with the show. Please stay with us.
But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
Not necessarily tribal or regional.
I have said that